A hope for the future. It is a message from the past to tomorrow. It is founded on knowledge and fueled by idealism. It functions on the efforts and dedication of its staff and is inspired by the example of their predecessors. Some of these have loaned their names to these collections of bricks and people and aspirations. They are the faces behind the schools. We salute those educators for whom schools in our parish are named. Miller Wall was a man of honor. The family name, Wall, goes back to the Battle of Hastings in 1066. His father emigrated from England, and Miller Wall was born in Wilmington, Delaware on November 30, 1842. He and his family moved to Jefferson Parish in 1854, where they resided in Amesville, which has been renamed Marrero. His family were successful planters, producing sugarcane and cotton. Miller Wall served on the police jury and took part in the civic affairs of the parish, but was especially interested in the education of its youth. In 1888, he was elected to the school board and served for 20 years, 12 of them as president. Jefferson Parish was growing, and its school system had to expand. Miller Wall and others continually worked to improve the schools. At last, in 1905, the people voted a 2 mill property tax to build schools. Immediately, bids were given out, and by 1906, 2-room schools were being built. An up-to-date high school was badly needed on the West Bank, but funds were not available. Miller Wall suggested the school board petition the McDonough Commission to grant part of the McDonough funds to Jefferson Parish. President Wall and Superintendent Middleton were appointed to call on the McDonough Commission. It was pointed out that McDonough's home was in Jefferson Parish, and that the children of his home parish were entitled to share in his gift. Also, if the money was granted, the school would be built in McDonoughville, close to the Algiers line. Thus, the school would serve the children of Algiers as well as the children of Jefferson's West Bank. The McDonough Commission finally gave Jefferson Parish $10,000, and a 99-year lease was signed for the use of the land. The McDonough-Jefferson High School was built in 1907. Through that school would pass the students and teachers who would assure the future of Jefferson Parish. It provided a breeding ground for education and for educators. 3 of the children of Miller and Rebecca Wall would become educators. Helen began teaching at Ames Elementary in 1926 and taught for 40 years. 3 times she was offered the principalship, but turned it down to remain with teaching, her first love. William, the first son, taught math, science, and coached at Westwego High School. He was also principal at Marrero High School from 1938 to 1955. Miller Wall's 10th and final child, Gloria Rebecca Justice, taught at Marrero High for 12 years. Miller Wall resigned from the school board in July 1908 after his election as second Justice of the Peace for the 4th Ward, an office he held for 8 years. He had come to Jefferson Parish at a time when there were no public schools on the right bank of the Mississippi River. As a member of the police jury, he was instrumental in appointing a 15-man school board and appropriating $2,000 for education. As a member of that school board, he saw the expansion of the elementary school system and the construction of the first high school. He remained active in the political and civic affairs of the parish until his death on February 3, 1928, at the age of 85. His children carried on his work, educating the youth of Jefferson Parish after his death. His legacy lives today. Paul J. Solis was born September 19, 1906 in Mobile, Alabama, to Georgia and James Solis. He attended elementary school in Westwego and was graduated from Westwego High School in 1926. In high school, he combined scholastic achievement with physical adroitness. Next, he attended Louisiana State University, where he earned a B.S. in chemistry. After graduation, he worked for a short time as an assistant chemist in an alcohol plant in Westwego. On February 3, 1932, he married Catherine McNamara. That fall, he began teaching science and mathematics at Westwego High School. His duties also included coaching basketball, football, and boxing. After teaching and coaching for 5 years, he was appointed supervisor of classroom instruction, a position he held until called to active duty. In February 1941, he entered the Army as a first lieutenant. He was later sent abroad, where he distinguished himself in combat, particularly in one battle, which was a decisive engagement in the Battle of the Bulge. In the words of John S.D. Eisenhower in his History of World War II, "These pages abound with stories of commanders who did more than was expected of them. Major Paul J. Solis, preventing Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper from seizing a gas dump. This particular action was a key factor in determining the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge." The citation accompanying the presentation of the Military Cross by the British government described the action for which he was commended. Once back in Jefferson Parish, he resumed his position as supervisor. He completed graduate work begun before the war by earning his master's in education at LSU. He was next appointed assistant superintendent in 1949, a job he held until the illness of the superintendent necessitated his becoming acting superintendent for 13 months. In 1963, on the death of Superintendent Higgins, Paul Solis was named superintendent for the remainder of the unfulfilled term. He reorganized the school board administration according to modern management techniques. The contracts for purchasing and construction were scrutinized by a planning consultant. Financing of the school system was explained to the public by television panels, and school board and administration personnel spoke before civic and parent groups explaining the use of the money. His professional ideals were best expressed by him in a newspaper interview before his retirement. "School teaching has never been a money-making profession," he said. "It is a calling requiring unbounded interest and dedication." His life was one of always doing more than was asked for in a situation. At the time of his death, he was still active, serving the parish he loved in many civic activities. Stella Eleanor Worley was born in Gretna on August 4, 1878, and educated in the primary schools of that town. She graduated from the Girls' High School on the corner of Chippewa and Jackson Streets in New Orleans in June 1897, there being no such facility in her native Gretna. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from Tulane University. It was in the schools of Jefferson Parish that Miss Worley gave her lifetime of valuable service. Many tales can be told of her travels to reach the students who needed her. Her daily travels by Texas and Pacific Railroad to Fortier School near Ama, crossing the Mississippi River in a skiff to teach in a one-room schoolhouse near Westwego. The school housed 72 pupils, all ages, all size, and all grades. In 1904, it was supplanted by a modest cottage on 3rd Street near Sala Avenue in Westwego. 95 pupils were enrolled. Material improvement and intellectual growth seemed to be striding hand in hand when fire destroyed the new school. Often in the moments of deepest crisis, the spirit of America shines brightest. The morning after the fire, parents gathered planks for seats supported by beer kegs and converted the Sharp plantation into a school. There were no blackboards, but there were slates. There were no textbooks, but interested persons donated books. During the next session, 2 groups of students were transferred from the plantation to Klaus's Hall on Sala and First, and others to the Presbyterian Church on Sala and Third. Miss Worley became a familiar sight, traveling from building to building, supervising classes at both sites and teaching her own classes as well. In 1910, the Westwego Elementary School was built, housing 860 students. Under Miss Worley's supervision, the faculty grew to 9. In 1923, Westwego High School was built with Stella Worley as principal and teacher of mathematics. In 1948, she retired, having been teacher and principal in Westwego for 49 years. She died February 21, 1966. Factual details, though they can relate a chronology, tell little of the wise supervision, the skillful teaching, and the years of loving care and unremitting concern for the education and guidance of the children of Westwego that make up the story of Stella Worley, principal, teacher, and friend to over 2 generations of the students of Jefferson Parish. Friday, February 1st, 1936 was a happy day in the life of Catherine Miss Kitty Strehle. She was honored in the afternoon by her current pupils at Gretna No. 2, and that night by some of her former pupils from her 57 years of teaching in Jefferson Parish. It was said that there was not one boy or girl in the city of Gretna for those 57 years who was not taught his or her first lesson by Miss Kitty. She began her teaching career in a 2-room frame building in what was then McDonoughville. Later, she taught in the school that was held in Gould Hall in McDonoughville, then in McDonough No. 28 when that school was located at Jefferson and Anson Streets. As the public school system of the community advanced, Miss Strehle was engaged to teach at the Gretna Academy, then located on 3rd Street between Lafayette and Amelia. Later, when Gretna Primary No. 1 was built on what was called Copernicus between 5th and 6th, she taught there until the construction of Gretna No. 2 on Amelia in 1929, where she spent the rest of her long, devoted career. Catherine Ivers Strehle was born, lived, worked, and died in the environs of what is Gretna, Louisiana, of one of the oldest families in Jefferson Parish, and she married into one equally illustrious. The Strehles were pioneers in Gretna, and the descendants have remained active in the professional, business, and political life of the area. Her home has recently been renovated by the Gretna Historical Society. Miss Kitty herself was a teacher, first, last, and always, who devoted her life and talents to the youth of her native parish. Many of her former students went on to prominence in politics, business, and the arts. The late Majority Leader of the House of Representatives of the United States of America, the Honorable Hale Boggs, was a Strehle pupil. R. Emmett Kennedy, a noted writer of the era, received the basics at her hands. Fred Middleton was a student who had the pleasure of hiring his teacher when he became superintendent of the Jefferson Parish Public Schools before becoming a judge. The superintendent of schools at the time of her retirement, J.C. Ellis, called her one of the most faithful and capable teachers in Jefferson Parish. Capable and faithful are words that well describe Miss Kitty. She lived quietly in her house near the Davy Crockett fire station. She was not one to mingle. She was a private person. Her passion was teaching her students, and then, when they themselves became parents, teaching in turn their children, who now became her students, stretching in a long line that never ended until her death on March 18, 1939, at the age of 81. But let's not end her story with that bare date. Let us end instead as we began, on that February day when mayors and judges, businessmen and superintendents, writers and singers, mothers and fathers drew together to pay her tribute. They gave her flowers and a book. They gave her a gold purse filled with gold coins. They gave back, as best they could, what she had given, as every teacher does, what she had given for 57 years, herself, her talent, her love. Miss Helen Cox was born in Jefferson Parish in 1872. She was educated there in the primary grades, but graduated from high school in New Orleans, as there were no high schools in Jefferson Parish at the time. Her bachelor's degree was obtained from Tulane University. She began her teaching career in the public schools of Jefferson Parish, and she served them for longer than anyone else. By report of her students, she had the supreme requisites for success in any field: personality, a sense of humor, a keen memory, a sense of discipline, and a will to succeed. In time, she would receive offers to leave the public schools of Jefferson Parish for greener fields, but she would turn them down. Here were her roots. Here was her commitment. Here she would stay. Her teaching career began in grade school. There was no other choice. Jefferson Parish had no high school. So, one day, the citizens of Jefferson Parish were treated to the sight of a young woman going from door to door. She had one simple question to ask of each household. If a high school were established, would the children of the house attend? And so, she became the founder of the very first high school in Jefferson Parish and one of the first in all the South. The doors of the new school opened in 1905 in what had been the old Knights of Columbus Hall. Later it moved and became McDonough Jefferson High School, which graduated its first class in 1908. In 1927, the name of the school was changed to Gretna High School. Its principal, Miss Helen Cox. She remained its principal for an incredible 41 years, from 1905 to 1946. Under her guidance, the high school became a vital part of the community and was indeed known throughout the state. As a matter of fact, Gretna High School came to be rated as one of the top 5 high schools in the state of Louisiana, led by the woman who had gone door to door asking if the people of Jefferson Parish would send their children to a high school if one were available. Miss Helen served the public schools of Jefferson Parish for over 50 years and lived to be 95 years old. At the age of 95, she was still able to attend reunions of her old students at Gretna High School, remember their names and pertinent details about their lives. The qualities which had made it possible for her to shape their lives stayed with her until January of 1967, when she died. The students she had taught in the first half of the century remained to teach those who would educate the shapers of the citizens of the next century. Some would go on to have schools named for them, as one is for her. To this extent, Miss Helen is still with us and will be as long as there is a high school in Jefferson Parish. Catherine Gertrude Middleton. Miss Kate, to several generations of children, was born in the area in which she spent most of her years as a teacher and as a principal. On May 4, 1877, the first child was born to Carolyn Ruprecht and her English husband, Frank Middleton, in McDonoughville, the part of Gretna near the river and close to the Orleans-Jefferson line. This area was truck farm and dairy farm country at that time. This was Miss Kate's home for the rest of her life. She attended the small local private academy, then went across the river as a high school-age student to Miss Sophie Wright's Academy for Girls, where she graduated from high school. Some of the friends she met there remained her friends for all of their lives. Young ladies in the 1890s had very few career possibilities, but teaching was considered a genteel occupation. The training school that she chose was in northern Louisiana at Natchitoches, what was then called a normal school and would now be called junior college. Miss Kate completed the course and returned to seek a teaching position in the quite newly organized Jefferson Parish Schools, where her brother, Frederick A. Middleton, was the first superintendent. The opening available was in Kenner. In that day, it was a train ride of considerable length, so the fledgling teacher lived with a family in Kenner as a boarder from Monday through Friday and taught several grades in one room for $30 per month. As an extra activity, she taught piano lessons. After 2 years, it was back to McDonoughville to the newly built school at Jefferson and Anson Street, McDonough number 26, whose benefactor was John McDonough, the Scotsman who was a plantation owner and financier who lived in the area. The years saw the growth of the school. World War I, the retirement of the first principal, and the naming of Miss Kate Middleton as principal. In the late 20s, the new school was built at Jefferson and Weedman. By now, there were many more students, one grade to a room, and a modern plant and equipment. McDonoughville was growing and was proud of the school. With the Depression years, families struggled to keep children in school and to clothe and feed them properly. Miss Middleton, as a principal who also taught almost full-time, was a busy person in these hard years as she was much involved in the affairs of the town. Next came the World War II years, when McDonoughville boys she had taught were being drafted, going to war, visiting home on furlough, and sharing their strange new experiences. Miss Kate did not retire until she was almost 70, having taught for 52 years. Someone asked her at retirement how many papers she thought she had corrected through the years. This brought a laugh. Her greatest collection was one of good memories of children and their parents. Miss Kate enjoyed teaching and everything that went with it. Her retirement years were quiet and relaxing until the several months of illness that preceded her death on May 15, 1952. She is buried in the McDonoughville Cemetery among the members of many of the families she had known all her life. Joshua L. Butler Sr. was the 11th of 17 children. Born in poverty, Mr. Butler's father and older brothers labored in the sugarcane fields of his little farm, cutting cane and doing menial labor that the younger Butlers might be educated. Mr. Butler began his education in a one-room schoolhouse, completing his elementary education at the academy in his native Houma. For his high schooling, he worked as a handyman and lived on the premises of Peck's Memorial Home in New Orleans. Graduation found him entering New Orleans University, later to become Dillard, as a pre-medical student. Though quite successful academically, economics would not permit of such an arduous course of study, so he entered education. Prior to his graduation, he taught for several years at Godey School, but a change of administration forced him to look elsewhere to support his growing family. Through his brother, he learned of an opening in Jefferson Parish. For the princely salary of $320 a year, he started teaching at Rosenwald Elementary in 1930. Though Rosenwald was an accredited school, an accredited high school for black students did not exist at that time in Jefferson Parish. Students who completed the 7th grade either got married or dropped out of school. This greatly disturbed Mr. Butler, who was now principal. He endeavored to change the situation by negotiation with the seemingly less than amenable school board. Diplomacy was also required with members of his own community who were similarly resistant to change. During these times of frustration, Mr. Butler was encouraged by Superintendent Higgins and others to continue. At last, Mr. Butler acquired a high school for Rosenwald, but not an accredited one. Students completing the 11th grade were forced to go elsewhere to be accepted into colleges. This was not Mr. Butler's dream. His dream was to have a fully equipped plant to meet the needs of all West Bank students, a plant that would compete favorably with any other high school. Finally, both elementary and high school at Rosenwald were accredited. Colleges began to unquestioningly accept graduates of Rosenwald, whose name was later changed to Marrero Oswego until Lincoln High School came into existence. Before the state or parish established a lunch program, Joshua Butler had one at his school. Maintenance was a problem. Mr. Butler and the larger boys made the repairs. The stoves needed wood. Mr. Butler provided it. In 1952, the pressures of post-war population growth created Lincoln High and Elementary in Marrero. Because of Mr. Butler's vision, many cultural activities were organized to improve school-community relations. Operettas, dances, PTAs, booster clubs, music concerts, proms, rallies, art displays. Since many students could not succeed academically, Mr. Butler promoted athletic achievement. Without a qualified coach or equipment, Mr. Butler implemented plans for an athletic program which resulted in the eventual hiring of a qualified teacher coach. Above all, it was Mr. Butler's goal to improve instruction and curriculum so that his graduates could face society with enthusiasm, health, and the skills for success. During the years of his separation from Lincoln and his retirement, Mr. Butler suffered from the pain of separation as well as physical ills. He died on June 25, 1965. He had nurtured what was to become a major high school in its intellectual and physical development through the embryonic, infant, adolescent, and adult stages. He suffered as it grew. He rejoiced as its graduates succeeded. This was his dream: to take potential talent from the community, to nurture and mature it in its development, and above all, to return it to the community to serve others. This he did. They are his true monument. I'm George Sanchez. We have just met another of the people for whom a Jefferson Parish school was named. Another person who has contributed to our past, shaped our present, pointed the way to our future. Another face behind the school. This has been another salute to an educator for whom a Jefferson Parish school is named.